Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we are looking at a wild snapshot of August 26th, 2026. We're going to break down how the biggest stories in tech, global trade, and climate aren't just happening at the same time. They are literally crashing into each other to shape our modern economy. The connections we're seeing today are absolutely fascinating.
All right, here's our roadmap. We're looking at the AI infrastructure boom, escalating North American trade, the Hormuz shipping crisis, domestic inflation, and we'll wrap up with the extreme heat.
Let's dive right into Section 1, the AI infrastructure boom.
The AI economy is just totally rewiring everything. We're talking local energy grids, massive corporate budgets, the whole shebang. Anthropic estimates this market could eventually top $30 trillion. Just let that number sink in for a second. 30 trillion. Companies are basically in an all-out sprint to claim their piece of this future, and they're making some historic financial bets to get there.
But as you might guess, the reality of actually making this tech work on the ground is pretty messy. Anthropic is reportedly dropping a staggering $45 billion just to rent computing capacity in West Virginia. But throwing money at the wall doesn't instantly solve the human side of the equation. Over at Meta, they're facing some really tough questions right now over an internal push to replace human workers with AI that, well, didn't quite pan out. Turns out you and I are a bit harder to replace than a server rack.
So the big takeaway here is that AI isn't just some invisible software floating around in the cloud. It has a massive, heavy physical footprint. Tech giants are scrambling right now. They're fiercely competing for vast tracts of land for data centers, escalating their orders for highly specialized chips, and desperately trying to invent completely new, more efficient cooling systems. And guess what? All of this requires a staggering amount of electricity, which is putting an immense strain on our power grids.
Okay, moving on to Section 2, escalating North American trade.
Now, this massive tech boom doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? Let's zoom out to the global stage, where things are really heating up right in our own backyard. Canada just hit the U.S. with $20 billion in retaliatory tariffs. We're talking hits on U.S. steel, dairy, appliances, and farm equipment. And the U.S. response? Well, President Trump countered by threatening sweeping 50% tariffs on Canadian autos starting January 1st if Ottawa doesn't reverse course.
As a direct result of this standoff, Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney is walking a serious geopolitical tightrope. He is facing intense domestic pressure right now. He has to somehow balance standing firm against these U.S. tariffs while desperately trying to protect Canada's export-dependent industries. It's an incredibly high-stakes economic balancing act for sure.
Which brings us to Section 3, the Hormuz shipping crisis.
Half a world away from North America, we've got another major choke point, and this one is directly threatening the very energy supplies needed to power global industry. Yeah, including those massive new data centers we just talked about. Iran and Oman are currently trying to negotiate a phased commercial corridor to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. They're actually working on removing the remaining sea mines, which is a step forward. But here's the massive sticking point. Iran is insisting on a strict continued ban on all military vessels. For Western nations looking for security guarantees, that is a major roadblock.
And you can see exactly how this uncertainty is playing out in the global markets. Because commercial traffic through the strait is so low right now, sheer scarcity has driven Brent crude prices up to near $87 a barrel. Traders are basically caught in a tug-of-war, weighing the optimism of these closed-door negotiations against the stark physical reality of empty shipping lanes.
The ripple effects here are just profound. This disruption has severely constrained Qatar's liquefied natural gas exports. Because those ships physically cannot get out of the Persian Gulf safely, European governments are being forced into urgent contingency planning for their winter energy supplies. It's a stark reminder of how a localized disruption can instantly create a massive global vulnerability.
All right, let's look at Section 4, inflation and the economy.
So with supply chains getting squeezed in North America and energy prices spiking because of the Middle East, it really leads us to one big question. Amidst all these billions and trillions of dollars dominating the headlines, how is all this macroeconomic turbulence actually impacting the average consumer?
Well, the answer is right here. The Federal Reserve's preferred inflation measure just hit a stubbornly high 3.7%. It completely exceeded economists' expectations. The administration is defending its strategy, but businesses are out there sounding the alarm, warning that these higher import costs are marching straight to the consumer. And that's driving up Treasury yields and making Wall Street incredibly anxious. But when we zoom out, we see this really fascinating and honestly kind of alarming disconnect. The everyday consumer is pulling back, and that's dragging U.S. economic growth down to just 1.5%. But corporate America? S&P 500 earnings for the second quarter just surged by 33.5%. Main Street is slowing to a crawl, while corporate earnings are absolutely rocketing.
And bringing this all the way back to our very first point on AI, Wall Street is trading incredibly cautiously right now. Investors are literally holding their breath, waiting for NVIDIA's quarterly results. This single report is the ultimate litmus test. Everyone wants to know if this extraordinary, historic AI infrastructure spending is actually financially sustainable, or if we're just running on hype. And that brings us to our final part today, Section 5, Extreme Heat and Health.
While tech and trade are dominating the financial markets, there is an entirely different kind of pressure bearing down on our physical environment right now. The American Southwest is currently enduring punishing temperatures reaching up to 115 degrees. 115. This isn't just a hot day. It is stretching human endurance and our physical infrastructure to their absolute limits.
This level of extreme heat is creating a massive, cascading effect across society. Hospitals are prepping for serious surges in heat stroke, and cities are rapidly expanding emergency cooling centers. At the same time, surging electricity demand, mostly from everyone blasting their air conditioning, is pushing power grids to the brink, forcing utilities to beg for conservation. And on top of all that, labor advocates are urgently renewing their demands for mandatory protections for outdoor and warehouse workers who are exposed to these lethal conditions.
Which leaves us with this final thought for today's explainer. We have these relentless AI-powered demands, putting huge pressure on the electrical grid while extreme heat is simultaneously pushing that exact same grid to the brink. We have shifting global trades squeezing the very supply chains needed to build out all this tech infrastructure. The forces of technology, geopolitics, and climate, they are no longer isolated. They're completely intertwined. So as these threads tangle even further, how will these intersecting forces shape the remainder of 2026? Are our current systems even built to handle this kind of interconnected disruption? That's what we all need to figure out. Thanks so much for joining me, and as always, keep your eyes on the data.